Hello, everybody. Sorry, Mike, I know you're going to lead it off. I'm just going to remind you, everybody, again, that this is not therapy hour. Today is instead being supplanted by the podcast, Effective Artistry, Neurodiversity, and Executive Function. Effective Artistry, Executive Functioning, and the Neurodivergent Mind. There we go. Now go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
Well, hi, welcome, everybody. And if you hear sirens or bells ringing, that's because our special guest today is streaming live from a high school, and so those noises happen when you're in the city. So my name's Mike Wang, and I am the head of school at Fusion Academy in Oak Brook. We are a private school serving a wide variety of students, many of whom identify as neurodivergent, but they just happen to thrive in a one-to-one model of instruction. And welcome to welcome to third episode of season 2 of Effective Artistry, featuring Brandon Tessers and our special guest. Now, before we officially get started, a reminder that today's stream will be recorded, rebroadcast in podcast form. We're currently streaming on Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube. So keep that chat box full. If there's anything that you want us to talk more about, or talk less about, go ahead and put it in there. I'll help moderate and read questions as they come in. Today, we have a very special guest on the stream, somebody who I am honored to call my friend. She is Annie Calhoun, and currently she's serving as the Department Chair of Theater and Musical Theater at the Chicago High School for the Arts. She's an actor, she's a writer, and an educator who helped found a school in LA and now oversees a public Chicago high school performing arts program specializing in providing inner-city youth with pre-professional arts training, many of whom identify as neurodivergent. So today we're diving into a topic that I know is near and dear to Brandon's heart. It's the performing arts and neurodiversity. And with all the introductions out of the way, it is my pleasure to give the floor to our featured guests and hosts, Brandon Tessers and Annie Calhoun.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
You're bringing already, Annie. You're like the dancing where I'm like getting pumped up for this. Thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm excited.
Yeah, we were just talking before we went live about how we have this kind of loose structure as opposed to, which, as a neurodivergent person and as an actor and an artist, appeals to me, where we just start a conversation, which is literally why I'm talking like this right now, because I don't want to put Annie on the spot and be like, start presenting to us about something that we did not discuss ahead of time. But we had a great conversation a few weeks back, a lot of interesting things talking about neurodiversity, the performing arts, and in particular, the work that you guys do at Chicago. I know you call it Shy Arts for short, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
So maybe we could start there with you telling us a bit about what it is that you do, both you individually and the school.
Yeah, sure. We were founded in 2009, and I was fortunate enough to be here when the school opened. And I had just finished my MFA in acting and jumped right into teaching here, which was really lucky and awesome. I have an undergrad in theater ed and English ed, 6th through 12th grade. And then after working here for 3 years, went to LA, helped found another school there, and have been back as the department head this is going on my 5th year. The school was founded to serve novice students in the arts and students that come from all walks of life, definitely diversity in race and ethnicity and socioeconomic status, and also, of course, how students think and process the world. And because we are looking for students who haven't had training since they were like 2, our 9th graders always come in at these varying levels, and some have only experienced theater through the television and through YouTube, which is vastly different from a live stage education and experience. So it's our 2nd day of school, and we're just beginning that journey with kind of 2 classes, because the 10th graders, for the most part, were home all last year, did not have a traditional 10th grade experience, and some came for hybrid learning for about 4 or 5 weeks. But as a group, they are brand new. So this is one of the first times half of our students in the whole building are new to high school. So lots of, I was just telling Mike before we started too, lots of, that office picture, the cliche one with the iceberg, and there's the little bit of it above the water, and there's a little boat, and there's this giant iceberg below the water that you just don't know until you kind of dive down and see it. So I know that exists. I don't know what it looks like. So I think day by day, we're going to kind of piece out and sort through all of the things that have been happening in students' lives and brains in this last 18 months. Some who already had some kind of neurodivergence, and some who picked up an extra set of anxiety or an extra layering of anxiety or depression in this last 18 months. So it's going to be an interesting ride here in the coming weeks.
Yeah. I mean, I am so glad that you and people like you are doing that, and also glad that it's not me. That's a lot to navigate. And when you're talking about your guys' mission, which I always think, awesome people who do awesome work all the time lose track of what makes them and their work so awesome, because it's just what you're doing every day. That mission really is so unique, that it's a public school, that you're specifically looking for people who are interested in a deep training in these modalities, but don't have the background in it. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to talk a little bit about, I also like the conversational style, because it doesn't, that way if it ends up being like we've already talking more about the school year and whatever, instead of whatever we labeled this thing, we needed to label it. But one thing that really stuck with me when we talked a few weeks back was, again, we were just talking about this right before we hopped on, that you were on a home visit, or just about to be on a home visit, which is, I guess I just wanted to bring that up so that you can talk a little bit about it, because I think it's so great.
Yeah, for sure. I have to shout out my some of my folks in Los Angeles, my school leader there, Tiffany Moore, and Aisha Bonner, who was the assistant principal. That was kind of standard at that school. So it was I was on a founding team for a arts middle school through the KIP program. And that was kind of their thing. Like, we did home visits to all the incoming, at that time, 5th graders. And I kind of rode along, and we would kind of go in groups, and we would usually have 100 kids coming in. So we'd all get a few, we'd do it as a team and get everybody covered if we could. And when I came back here, I was like, nobody's doing it here, but I would love to do it. And at the time, just asked if that was okay and if that was allowed, and it was. And the difference it makes is just like, it's just kind of phenomenal. And it plays out in different ways and slowly, and sometimes you don't see the benefit right away, but it lets the family know that how far they're traveling, because our school reaches all corners of the city, and I had a couple home visits this time where I had to take the Skyway, and I was like 2 blocks from Indiana. And then there's like people out past O'Hare. So it lets the family know, like, gosh, I know how long it takes for you to get to school and get home. And so I have that added level of kind of understanding and care. And then when you know the name of somebody's pet, it's just like, it changes their level of trust in a dramatic way. And you kind of know this time it was front steps, because I wasn't going in because of COVID, but we were sitting on front steps. But it kind of like accelerates all of that, like dropping coins in the bank, that metaphor of teachers, building trust and relationship with students in this like zooming accelerated way. And it allows me to partner with families and guardians in a way that if I sent an email home in the first week of school or second week of school, they're really receptive. They know my name. They know the face attached to it, instead of waiting till the first parent-teacher conference, which isn't like, till 2 months into school. Mm-hmm. So especially with those kids that need extra care and differentiation, which I found like a handful this time, it also, I could tell, it gave great relief to the families, because their kids haven't been in physical school again for a year and a half. So I felt like this year's home visits were kind of more emotional than they usually are, because like, we're seeing somebody come live in the flesh. And there's a lot of fear going into the next year of school, let alone high school, especially if it's like the oldest kid in the family. So it allows us to just like jump into the journey of how the arts can serve that individual a lot faster. And it's really fun. I like it.
Yeah, and for any of the people listening or watching that don't know, traveling that far across Chicago is a trip. I mean, talking more than an hour a lot of the time.
Yeah.
No, I love this. And part of the reason that when we were talking about people and topics and you came up for this is, I think there's a lot of overlap between the performing arts and neurodiversity. And part of what you're doing, I interpret it in terms of the more that you experience diverse contexts, people, background, whatever, the more you start to learn that there's things that you just don't know, right? Like the more you do that, the more you know that you don't know. And the more important listening becomes, which definitely as an actor, I'm sure there's things for us to discuss there. But because that, as great as it is, all these things, going out of your way and clarifying to them how important they are to you, and how, it's also what it is that you're doing in that. It's not just a token gesture. It's that you actually are trying to learn more about them and who they are, so that you have more information in order to be able to construct what's coming next to support them,
Yeah. It's pretty cool. And sometimes people open up in ways that they wouldn't if there wasn't somebody in their own personal space, because it is a little vulnerable to like allow somebody you don't know into your space and see you. By the way, I don't make it mandatory. It's a gesture. Almost everybody usually says yes, but I would never, say I'm coming into your house.
And allow me in.
Yeah, right. And they can meet me at the school here if they'd prefer I not come, but most people want me to come. So yeah.
So Annie, Annie, you're traveling all over the city. I mean, I know that the school itself draws from all 50 wards of the city. And for those of our audience members that are on a national basis or international basis, Chicago is a pretty diverse city, but there's some things that are sort of synonymous with race, right? When you say south side of Chicago, you usually mean black, brown. When you say north side, it usually means white. And that coming together, I know a big part of your program is building ensembles. Like, what are some things that you're putting into place in that arts training to address that set of diversity?
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I'm forgetting even that there's a broader audience than people that just know the city. The city was redlined. The city was divided in very racist ways, neighborhoods, and done with force with highways, and where highways were placed. And because we're kind of a little west of the Loop, a couple miles west of the downtown area, we're kind of in the middle. So yeah, we draw people from all over. As far as I know, and this is informally just from what I know, I don't know of another high school that is roughly, it changes every year, but roughly like a third Latinx, Hispanic, a third Black, and a third white. That's kind of unusual for Chicago because neighborhood schools, because of the segregation, are typically homogenous in one background ethnic group. So it provides us a different way in when we talk about anti-racism and conversations about theater and diversity in theater. And I keep challenging myself to go deeper with that every year. So I last year, when we were virtual, had new units on specifically anti-racism in theater, not just as an aside, but we dove right in. And the conversations are really rich, and the way we set up the conversations is specific to not really having a minority or a majority group. Although I did take Nicole Brewer's anti-racist theater workshop this summer, and she refers to Black and Latinx Hispanic people as the global majority, which I really love, and changing that language in that way. So the common denominator for us is play, and Mike knows this background about me, but I love Viola Boland's work. That's kind of my wheelhouse, my niche in the theater world, and it's something that my MFA program really capitalized on because she is a Chicago person, and her work, she's like the theater artist nobody hears a lot about because she wasn't like guru status. She didn't like promote herself. It was just about the work. So not a lot of people know that her son started Second City, and like all the improv we have today stemmed from Viola Boland. But her mission was really similar to Shy Arts, which is kind of cool. Like I don't know any other acting method whose goal is to serve diverse youth. So she was like working in Jane Addams' Hull House on the west side of Chicago and doing all these games for this big influx of immigrants into the city. And it really fits who we are in our population, especially in the first couple of years of the training here. And it's getting the kids out of a cerebral world and into a physical world and a shared space and a shared language. When they get out of their heads and they get into the physical, things become, especially for kids that are neurodivergent, things become more literal, tactile, present, and play has this magical quality of doing that. And so, yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about her method, but that's who we lean on to bring students together and create that community. And the home visit's a part of that, because I say in the home visit to the whole family, this is how we're going to start, and here's what we do. We support, and I kind of just list like those tenets of what it's like to be in a community. And I also prepare them for the bumps. Like, this isn't going to be perfect. We're going to have a talk about social media because there's going to be something that comes up. So yeah, her work's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I love that. And just to say, I don't know her. My bachelor degree is in acting. You know, I studied this and I was not introduced. So just to drive home your point of how that's not as widespread as it sounds like it definitely should be. And I kind of want to just learn more about the elements of that work, because there's a lot in the performing arts. It's one of those kind of anecdotal correlations that we see all the time. Of it seems to be that that there is a correlation between neurodiversity or neurodivergent condition, whatever, neurodivergent behaviors, and enjoyment of, in particular, the performing arts, although creativity and the arts in general.
Right.
But that improv kind of thing, that listening, that co-creating, you know, a lot of what we do here, I like translate what the guest is talking into our terms, which we're already using a lot of the same terms that we use. You know, the ability to come out of the head and into the moment, to kind of reality check or perception check by sharing what I'm thinking and experiencing, and giving you an opportunity to react that I can then react to, and as opposed to just kind of having everything pre-planned out, and therefore I don't need to listen to you because I know what I'm doing next, you know?
Yeah. Yes.
I think, you know, we talked with Derek Dawson last week, who does anti-racism training, and we had a wonderful conversation. I love seeing it come up in this context as well. And again, I think there's correlations there too, but I feel right now I'm feeling a little like I started off with a question about you and what you're doing, and so we're focused on the kids and the methods and the paradigm or whatever, but I kind of just want to know more at this point about your relationship with the arts, your own experience and thoughts of, I mean, obviously this is a passion of yours, or you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. So aside from the education side and how you're facilitating all that, the other side of it, that performing arts side.
Yeah. Sorry, our maintenance came in to check on something. So the last part of what you asked was diving in more.
Just opening it up to talk about your relationship with the performing arts, in addition to the relationship with the students and the school and all that stuff.
Yeah. Let's see.
Maybe I could ask it this way. Did you get into this with the intent of being an educator in the performing arts, or did you approach the performing arts as a performer and then later kind of
Okay, so more personal journey stuff, and then how the
if that's
yeah, of course. So I encountered Spolin's work when I was in middle school, which is like the place where everyone's like swimming, like, can I find my group, can I find my space? And it was just a public middle school near Waukegan, Illinois. And I had this teacher who had a degree in technical theater, but had been seeped in Spolin for whatever reason. I don't know where he went to school. We're friends to this day. He came to my sister's wedding. He would have come to mine, but it was in California. And I remember being there and being like, what is happening? Like, what is going on? How come I feel so like courageously safe? Like, why aren't there, like, there's no clicks? Like, what is this work, you know? And he was just going through, I mean, Spolin's got a book of games and they're really structured. He was just literally going through page by page, which I learned later. But at the time I was like, who is this magical person and how are they taking us to this work? And so later learned more about Spolin. But from that point, when I was 13, 14 years old, I was like, oh, I want to do this. Like, this is amazing. And I knew at that point I wanted to do it and teach it, because I always knew I loved kids and I loved youth. So and doing both just informs the other just so beautifully. And so I Sometimes in my life, I'm doing more of one than the other, performing myself or teaching. But so that's where I know the inner, like I was the student of the work at a young age where it's really formative, but it was so empowering. And so, again, it's so anti-authoritarian. It's all about the student and the group and where things go. And then when I got my MFA, it's a 3-year program at DePaul. The first year is all Spolin. And it was like, oh yeah, like now I'm coming at it, with an adult brain, but it does the same thing to you. And what I always tell the students is like, we'll play an exercise or do something. And I remind them that like, I did this in grad school, and play is not for a certain age and then it's over. In fact, where we really need it is when we start to fall out of it, and where you're in that middle, like adolescence is where it's so needed, where there's all this like judgment and like the ego takes over just because that's where the brain is at. And like the limbic system is going crazy because they're high schoolers and you just like trying to get them out of the fight or flight and into the play. So I love it. And I've used it in shows I've directed. There's ways to use Spolin's work with scripted material that's really lovely. So like a simple example is a game, I think I'm misnaming the game, but it's like a touch to talk game. So like if you and I were in a scene together and we were just in rehearsal, every line I say or you say, we would have to make physical contact. Like maybe we touch elbows on that line, or like I touch the tip of your finger with my finger on this line, or and it's obviously there would be consent because there needs to be consent to physically touch in a rehearsal. But what it does is it shakes the scene up. So the way that I was saying this line like this every time, now I'm kind of giggling because, you nudged my foot on that line. And so it pops you out of the prepared and the practiced. And again, makes you just be really, really present, listening to the other person. And there's a lot of other games like that too. So you can use the work with youth, and you can use it, in professional situations as well.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I can't remember. I think I've already said this phrase earlier, but that's one of those common things that people talk about in acting. Acting is reacting, right?
Right.
But don't really get into and explain that, the trick of, especially in scripted work, the trick is that you do know where it's going. You do have to hit your cue and say your line, but you have to forget that you know where it's going, and act as though every time you're saying something, you don't know what's going to happen next.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
People who don't get as much who aren't performers themselves, tend to compliment performers on things like, wow, I can't believe you remember all those lines, or you're so emotional, or like things that for us we're like, yeah, that's not an intended thing. That's just a consequence of the fact that I'm trying to communicate with this person on stage with me.
Right, totally. Yeah, and I've done Groundlings in Second City and IO and UCB and all of those schools too. And it all stems from her work, and it, like when you're doing those high level improv things, if you don't have those foundations, then it becomes really showboaty and really kind of scene grabbing, that sort of thing. And so one of the phrases that I use with the kids a lot is give generously, take greedily. Because you have to know both, and how to go back and forth between both.
I like that. I can't remember if I heard this from someone directly or if this is just a thing, but some point I heard about a casting director talking about every young actor comes in for their audition with the monologue prepared, and they start by, their back is to you, and then they turn around and they start screaming and crying right away, like as though that is acting, is just emoting. But this is part of where I think, and I love this whole thing we're doing, because we get to approach similar concepts through different paradigms.
Yeah.
What you're talking about in terms of play and safety, what in my world we would probably talk about as something like productive discomfort, the idea that in order to be able to dedicate enough of your resources to the moment that you're listening and observing and responding, you have to feel safe, so that you don't need to be observing all that other stuff that might cause you. So that safety is kind of that first piece. And to me, that's like why we call it play then instead of work. It's experiment, try different things because you're safe. If you try something and it doesn't work, it's okay, as opposed to normal life. Like you're saying, when we fall out of play as adults, as people become adults, there's this tendency to shift into, oh, if I don't do it right, like I'm going to be in trouble, I'm going to be embarrassed. So it's harder and harder to create that space to say, no, play around, do whatever you want to do. We'll see where it goes,
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's so true. That made me think of there's this, I forget what the name of the book is, like What Are We Doing? Something like that, by Bruce Perry, and partnered with Oprah and like helping her with her school as she realized how much trauma the kids in the school that she created in Africa had. And something like, moderate stress and in stressful situations builds stress resilience, which is like, I was like, that's theater. It's like, it's all of these like kind of safe, courageous, moderate stress, but it builds stress resilience. And the kids, anybody who's kind of experienced the capital T a big trauma, or lots of little ones that have like added up to a big one, which is like a lot of our kids right now, that again you wouldn't know until you play something. It's like if where they're coming from is so crazy, they're going to cling to kind of like the fence if there's a fence around a playground. But if where they come from is kind of stable, and even this last year of 18 months at home, and almost even boring, then they're coming in with a lot of curiosity. But kids aren't curious when they are worried about the basic level needs. So
Right.
that's also something we're always kind of like tuned in for, instead of just thinking like, that kid's checked out, or like, why doesn't that kid want to play? And like, everybody wants to play. It's just like inherent in human nature. So if somebody doesn't, or something, like, it's obviously something else is going on.
Yeah. I think that's so key, and people lose track of it, especially with children, but with all that kind of operant conditioning style things of punishments and rewards and whatever, is if people are not feeling safe, children, adults, whoever, if they're not feeling safe, they can't learn, they can't do anything else, because their resources are consumed by making sure that they're safe. And so when we get too far into like, we gotta punish them this way or whatever, we make the problem worse a lot of the time, because now we're just putting more conditions on them where they've got to observe themselves and observe us because of what we might do. And I'm curious, because you mentioned non-hierarchical, right? That we're talking and listening in equal measure, not just the performers or the kids with each other, but the adults and the instructors with the children. And I'm just, it's making me think of Mike, what you guys do at Fusion in that one-on-one. It's like you said, Annie, you never know what you don't know, right? So you can't, so mistakes will happen. There are going to be times where, and when I've got 25 kids in the classroom, it's a lot harder to do that, which you guys have methods of doing. But in that one-to-one, whether you intend to do it or not, it's going to happen, because there's only one student. Like if you say it should make sense in this way and it doesn't to them, I don't know, maybe you can talk a little more about that, Mike, because that's not something that I do in an education sense.
Well, I mean, in terms of so full transparency, Annie and I used to work together at the school, and coming from a traditional setting to where I am now, it definitely was a challenge in sort of building that community in a group of 25, 30. Now, Annie, how big are ensembles now at Shy Arts for theater, musical theater? Is it?
They're getting a little bit bigger, so 22.
22. Yeah, I mean, that's still a challenge for the teachers to be able to, well, the word that we always use is classroom management, right? But it's more about behavioral personality, and also being able to prioritize the quote unquote learning objectives that we have for each of those courses, and balance all those things at the same time. It's like spinning plates and jumping on one leg. I mean, here in the one-to-one school, I have a great job in which I get to build that relationship with the parents and the family, with the child, understanding what their priorities are, what their needs are, whether it's some sort of neurodivergency, or there's some other sort of need that they have. And then my job is being matchmaker and pairing them up with a teacher whose personality, teaching style, I think that they would really mesh well with, and giving them all that info before the first day so that they kick it off. And that relationship piece, that unconditional love piece, and then understanding that motivation all comes before we start lesson planning. Where with Annie, these kids are coming from all over the cities, all different backgrounds, all different levels of training. Maybe you can talk about like, how do you get teachers to be able to balance all of that? Like, I feel like I have it easy now compared to what you all do.
Yeah, sure. So, like, I guess I go back to, I was a soccer player growing up. So the boundaries, the lines that are drawn around a field or around the playing space in a classroom, especially a theater classroom, are really important, because the kids, go back to what you were saying earlier, Brandon, like the kids need to know when they're in play and when they're not in play, and the difference between those, and what what are all of the guidelines so that they can have the creative freedom to play and to invent. And so I think what's really important is that we all come in with the same set of like kind of starting systems and norms. So one thing that seems kind of simple, but it's a huge deal, is we all put the phones up in these pockets right there. And it does a lot, because it doesn't just minimize the distraction. It also decreases levels of fear, because then they're not worried that somebody else is going to take a video of them or a picture of them. So that's a norm. Starting the first 5 in the same way, typically with some kind of breathing exercise. The circle, which is been used a lot in education recently as kind of like a restorative practice, but has always been done in cultures as like a community thing. You know, we stand in a circle, we breathe, and we move. And how we set up the physical space, because we're transitioning classrooms that have a bunch of desks in them, you know, and making sure that there's a clean line between what the space looks like physically to play in versus what it looked like when I had math class in this room. And so we start with those things, and then I think it's just about building trust. It's about keeping the pace moving a lot. So really knowing the structure of, okay, if I'm in the boundary lines, thinking about soccer again, I'm in play. What am I doing as an audience member? Because we talk a lot about the audience is still a player. And so when I'm not in the boundaries of the play space, what's my role as someone who watches? And so if the people that are watching don't understand that they're part of the play, because you can't have a play without an audience, and there's so much interchange between an audience and a live performance that is energy giving, you know, and cyclical. If they don't understand that, then what happens is there's a lot of fear for those that are in the playing space, because they're worried. We don't want them to worry about what their audience is going to do. So the audience has a lot of standards about like how they sit, and sitting uniformly with, like, again, non-verbally facing the players. And like something I just talked about yesterday was like, we went over, I go, what in middle school were all the things that would happen when somebody made a mistake in class? And they, oh my God, all of them. And they acted them out too, because they love to express, right? So they're like, we would say, ooh, we would do this. We would say, oh no, you didn't do that. You know, they go all this. And then I just stop them. We pause and I go, that's not going to happen here. You know, and I say it with authority, and it's not. And of course we're going to make mistakes and we'll stumble, but they need to know that, like, we don't do that in these classes. And here's what you will do. So then we, when they are audience, they have to be engaged by giving verbal feedback, by writing things down. And that way, when they go up to play, they know what to expect. They're going to expect that their peers are quiet, that their peers are responsive, and that I talk about, like, if we have a really funny student, that student needs the room to be serious too. So if the audience puts that student in a box and only laughs, in a good way, right? Like, always, like, even when they're trying to get serious, they're whatever. I was like, you're the ones holding them back, because they travel in these ensembles for 3 hours, the same group of kids every day, which would be hard for like any adult to do in their youth. And so I think those are the most important, like, systems, norms for them to have, so that again, when they get up to play, there's freedom there. And I teach all of the incoming 9th graders, so that's one of my I love setting culture and building ensemble, and so that's my wheelhouse. So we do a lot of that.
I love that. And what keeps coming to me, so I want to call some of this out, because that's part of what we're doing in these things, right? Is that things that people might not pay close attention to. Okay, you physically change from the desks to, you know, because they are just hearing it as a practical matter. I want to call it out, and so that people are aware of what it means to communally create a space, for example, right? To have a sense of individual ownership, even if it is just moving desks, or rituals that, you know, the school where I went, you know, before every performance of every show, we did the same, whether the weather is good. I don't know if you know that one.
Yeah.
But there's all these rituals and superstitions within theater. The idea of things need to be structured and predictable enough that I feel safe, but with enough flexibility and freedom in it that I can try different options. Which, again, for me, coming back to the performing arts, in particular acting, or, you know, taking on the role of a character, because dance and singing and, you know, musician, you know, in general also do those things. But I kind of think, and I would love to know if there's more, if anybody has any other ideas. But to me, I find 3 things that allow this particular way of I'm the character, but I'm not the character. So I can explore some things in the identity of the character while still knowing that it's not me. And the performing arts is one, video games is the other, and tabletop role-playing games is the third. And specifically the performing theater in particular and tabletop role-playing games are the ones that are done in community, where you're playing off of other people. So this idea of, hey, you need to know, really a lot of it, I'll translate if there's any therapists listening. This is what you're talking about is what we would talk about is like the elements of doing group therapy work. That there are 4 phases, and there's different paradigms, but generally the most popular, we'll talk about 4 phases of group work. One is bringing them together, forming the group, and that includes sharing norms and creating expectations so everybody feels safe and know what's coming. The second is conflict, that as soon as we have the group together, there will immediately start to be things where somebody is unaware of how what they're doing will impact somebody else. It will come up. We don't have to make it happen. And then the third is when we work through and repair, because the point is not to predict how everybody's going to do everything, but to be ready for the fact that things will happen that people don't like, and how do we repair and understand what happens so we can utilize it going forward. And then fourth is kind of closing the space, everybody resolving it and taking it away. So there's really a lot of, in all these elements that a lot of people are probably hearing and dismissing very quickly, right? That we make sure that they all sit, that everyone's going to probably mostly hear is like, oh, that's polite. Well, yes, it is. But there's all this depth behind it of why the brain can operate in that way under those conditions, and only under those conditions. That you have to facilitate. When I run a group, I have to facilitate and say, everybody knows that I'm here, and that no matter what happens, I will make sure that everyone here is safe. And they need to have that trust in you, which they do because you do it every time.
Yeah. No, that's really well said. And sometimes I'm reminded of those things every time we have a new teacher too. Where it's like, oh yeah, we have to like go back and think about all of the little things that add up to big things. One thing I brought one quote that I love. This is quote unquote. Okay. That applies to this too. She says, when urgency or anxiety appears, find the focus and hang on. It's the tail of the comet. And I think that goes back. So like once those norms are set, when you're exploring and you're playing in the space, she gives a really clear focus to every exercise so that it's not, so it's very clearly directed and not in a way from like anything, again, attention seeking, showboating. And the very first exercise or game that happens to teach what a focus is in a acting game is this game called Exposure. And so it's like everybody stands up and or half the group stands up, half watches, and all you say is, okay, we're just going to watch you for a minute. And you can't speak, just stay there. And anything, all of the little fidgets you think would happen, like, okay, we're being watched, and they're like kind of fiddly, whatever. And then you say switch, and then the group that was watching gets up and they do it. And then you say switch again, and you say, okay, now as you're standing, count every floorboard in the room while you're standing. You have a minute, go. And then you see them focus, and they're trying to count, and then you say, how many did you get to? You got 58. You got da. And then you just ask these, her games always end with a reflection, which is not the teacher saying, so here, this was the point. That you ask questions at the end and you say, what changed when you had to count floorboards versus when we just watched you? And they, oh, well, and you, it's again, going back, especially for students that need to observe the world in the physical. It's like, no, what physically changed? What did you physically do? Oh, well, my breath was more, I wasn't breathing as fast and my hands fell back at my sides. And, so we always go for really like physical, tangible ways that something changed in the reflection. And then they kind of, oh, wow, when we have a focus, something to hang on to, we feel our anxiety, our self-consciousness goes way down. And they're allowed to kind of play and explore. So that's like the first one. And then every exercise after that obviously gets very harder. But it's all back to that, like every game has a focus. And you hang on to that, and it takes you into the present in the moment, and less about like, how good am I going to look in this game? Because peers in front of peers in high school is tough. It's really tough.
Yeah. And Annie, you're working with an age group, 15 through 18-year-olds, that this is that time where they're figuring out who they are as people. They're going, when we worked together, there were a number of kids, gender identity. They were going through, there might be newly diagnosed as neurodivergent. What's some of the work that you're doing in the arts training portion to help them discover themselves as well as themselves as artists?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think being really aware of all the little things, and then following up with one-on-one conversations, and making sure I'm communicating with their diverse learners teacher as well. So I know everything I need to know. So like things like I read a passage yesterday and I'm really aware of pronouns when I speak now. So if I'm reading something that has a masculine pronoun, I always insert, he, she, they, and just those little things, because the second day of school are starting to create like, oh, okay, this is how this teacher operates. And then we every year, I've been back as department head. We've had more and more transgender youth or youth that are exploring gender identity for sure. And we have teachers that are really quick to be open and remember. So the minute one of us knows that a student's exploring a different pronoun, it's sent out to the other teachers, and it's like the next day that's that. Similar with names. I think some of the things you would do in a traditional classroom with some students, like, hey, Wes, I'm going to call on you after I call these first two students. So giving some students that need a lot of processing time, prepare to speak. I've got students with a couple, I think, with dysgraphia. And so finding alternate ways, if we do a quick like journaling or writing, different ways for that student to express so that they're not stuck when they write. We've had more and more students with dysmorphia and not being really obsessed with part of their face. And interestingly enough, the masks are great for these. These students are like loving the masks. But we've now had a chance to order some clear masks. And so we've got students doing this, covering their face as they perform. So, in a regular classroom or a regular academic classroom, that wouldn't be a huge issue. But you think about I'm thinking like, wow, they've got a really, I'm seeing, senior year, how can we get them from going like this, because they're in a theater program every day for 3 hours, to having confidence on stage and performing. So those are a couple things. But again, always circling back to the family and trying something. If it didn't work, check in again and try something different. The one thing that's hard about accommodating is that we just, when a performance date is set, we have to meet that performance date. So as opposed to like a test where you can have extended time, or homework where you can have more time to memorize, those are the times where we all have to like jump in as a team effort to make sure the student's ready for the performance.
I want to quickly throw out, because I'm so involved and engrossed in this conversation, I'm sure a lot of the people here watching and listening are too, that part of what we're trying to do is answer questions from chat and things like that. So just as an invitation for people to put that in there, but we'll keep talking until and unless we see things pop in there. And I wanted to point out real quickly, and I appreciate you bringing up pronouns, because one of the things that I left out when I was talking about performing arts is drag, which is another way to be able to explore identity and through character, right? And even a lot of what I love about how more and more gender is being treated as what it is. Gender identity is performance, right? It's deliberately constructing the way that you are presenting yourself to other people, or at least I guess if you think about it, it's deliberate. Otherwise, you kind of default to things. And it just keeps coming back to me to this idea of safety and challenge, right? Like, if one of the things I loved about acting that drew me to it, I'm an unusual person, right? I grew up, I'm not a very emotionally expressive person, or at least not in ways that most people tend to recognize. And I would watch TV shows and movies, and I would watch people intently and then mimic their faces and mimic their voices in the mirror and be like, okay, this is what this smile looks like. Even to this day, when I'm on a Zoom call, I have to turn off my own video a lot of the times, because otherwise I'll watch like, what am I looking like? What do I think they're reading from me? But in acting, when I played Jason, for example, in Medea, like that I get to weep and wail and gnash my, literally slam my face against the ground in a safe way. And I get to explore what it's like to be that, to express in that way without any fear. Because if anybody's like, whoa, that's a little much, I'm like, well, that was the character. That wasn't me.
Right.
if anything, I get more accolades for being like, wow, you really were, as opposed to the risk of how will people react if I do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
So with drag and gender identity and all of these things, the ways to start to separate and identify identity as separate from yourself, who you are, and then the identities that you utilize. My mentor, Andy Mahoney, would always talk about this kind of thing. Those are two different things. And teens, I feel like, have always just been better about this, right? Like knowing, like, yeah, I'm going to try on this identity this year. But a lot of people view that as they're trying to find their identity, and you lock in. And by the time you're an adult, this is who I am now. I don't try on new identities anymore. But artists, performers, gamers, there's a lot more of that freedom and flexibility to continue to be changed by the environment. I'm not the same person in every different context, right? Which encourages me then to pay attention to the context, to be aware of the fact that other people and other things around me impact me. I'm reacting, not acting, instead of just stepping in and saying, this is what I'm doing because this is what I do every time, and it always works. And if it doesn't work, it's because you're wrong. We change, but we have to be safe in order to do that.
Yeah, that's really awesome. All those things. Yeah, that's definitely where we are with all our students in terms of lots of exploration. And what's funny is, like, when you put it in that context, what you just said, I'm like, boy, I wish the rest of the world could kind of experience this, not high school, but experience this environment where it's like, I have a student who just loves dressing up in different genres, and almost every day it's goth, and then it's 50s, and then it's, and the nature of the brain wants to like fix something into what, instead of let it be fluid, and wants to go like, well, what kind of person is this kid? It's like they're exploring and they're playing and and the exploration might just continue. Like you said, it's like, it's not going to then land. It's like this person is just loving who they are and trying different things. Yeah, it's just not something that like our culture as a whole is. I mean, we're getting better at it in niche settings like the arts, but there's still so many norms that our kids push back on, which I think are great.
Yeah, well, and you saying that makes me realize we've been focusing on the benefit of the experience of engaging in the arts for the artist, and not talking so much about the benefit of the arts for the community in which those arts are, because arts are done for an audience. They're created with the express purpose of other people seeing it, impacting other people. So the arts kind of do occupy that role a lot of times of, we get to be the leading edge. We get to experiment and try things because it's the arts and it's safe, but that's how we kind of shift our cultural conversation more and more in certain directions. Somebody in the chat there said about drag ? And then said I answered the question. So now I'm super curious about what the question was. But I think that's a great example of utilizing art to present things. Humor actually is a lot like this too. Stand-up comedy in particular. In my world, we would consider it Ericksonian hypnosis. Basically, a lot of what you're talking about is drawing people's attention to non-problematic things. So spending a disproportionate amount of attention on a thing than it actually needs. Do you really need to know how many floorboards there are? No, but we make a situation or context in which you do, and it just kind of trips you out a little bit. But yeah, drag in particular is one of those things where we can present, or those who do it, because I don't want to claim that I'm only an observer, not a performer of drag, but those who do it present things in ways that or in contexts which would otherwise be unsafe to do those kinds of things. But because it's in the structure of art, it opens doors and allows us as a society to shift the way that we're thinking about things through that safe exploration. Because as the audience member, that you get to just sit there. Like how nervous do people get when they go to a performance where it's one of those ones that are like, oh, are they going to interact with me or ask me to do things?
Right.
I want to be safe and sit here, and then you present things to me in a way that, like horror movies, right, or sad, depressed, these terrible, awful things, but it's in the context. I guess it's catharsis in a sense, right? Like, allow me to experience this experience in a way that I know isn't actually connected to my real life, unless I find ways to connect pieces of it. Yeah. I'm fascinated in this conversation by, I've only been a performer, not a teacher of the arts. So I'm fascinated in how much of what you do in the methodology really is the exact same as what we're talking about in therapy, just a different modality of doing the same thing, allowing people to explore and find new things that they might like better.
Yep. Yeah. There's a lot of crossover. And I think what grounds us, because we're not trained therapists, what grounds us in the safety of what we do is the play and the constructs around play. Because if a student tries to go to a place that uncovers something really deep, we're not equipped to handle that. And so we have to allow for the freedom and also best way to put this, know where the end is too. So if it goes to a place with the student that's they relive something really traumatic, that we can get them also the help that they need. So that's something that I'm careful about too, in terms of what methods we use, because there are some acting methods that dredge up past memory and can like relive a trauma, which isn't great for students that have a lot of trauma. So we tend to live in the play space and find things through there that are really different and unique. And we have to be careful about going, too dark.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a reason, for those who aren't as aware of acting things, that Annie used the word method twice in talking about certain ways of acting that dredge into your own past, which we discussed how much we don't like it. I understand, Mike, that Annie's needing to move on to the next part of your day. Is that right?
Yes, I probably have to go be with a class of kids in a few minutes. Yeah.
Well, Annie, thank you so much for your time. We'll continue this conversation. We just really enjoyed you sharing what you do, and you can definitely tell that you have such a passion and you're so dedicated to the work of developing young artists and really being able to play into their development as human beings. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I love you starting with that story of that teacher who was magical and impacted you in that way, and now you're that person for hundreds, if not thousands, of kids. That's awesome.
Oh man, it's the best. It's really cool, hard, beautiful work. So, but thank you both. I really feel honored to be here and be able to share, just kind of like the awesomeness of the students here and what we're about. So thank you again. I appreciate it. And cool. I'm gonna listen to this more now that I know it exists. It's awesome. So keep it up.
Well, thanks so much, Annie.
All right, take care.
Now, Brandon, we've been talking about this, like, we're trying to build ensembles, there's play, but in some ways the performing arts is also pretty competitive in some ways, right? Like, I mean, I think outside of in music, you're competing for chairs and you're trying to get first chair and you're trying to move up sections, but there's that competitive component of the performing arts as well. Can you talk a little bit about that and that experience for neurodivergent folks?
Yeah, well, okay. Especially after last week and this week, we're just really showing off our ideological sides here, which I like. So that competitive aspect of the arts is not intrinsic to the arts; it's intrinsic to the industry of the arts. Competition is capitalistic in nature. It's about value propositions and blah blah blah. We won't go into all that. But even things like grades, right, is the same kind of thing. Those are structures that do not promote safety, right? So yeah, it is really, really hard for neurodivergent people to be performers if they're trying to do it in a way that they make a living off of through the existing like dominant paradigm. There are lots of people who do really great things in expanding and opening up into new things. Improv, for example, is that she kept talking about, is a great example of, okay, this theater thing seems cool, but there's a lot of stuff going on here that I don't like. Let's do it a different way. But of course, everything eventually gets co-opted into being about competition and making money. No, it is something that people need to be aware of. And in the arts, we talk about it all the time. If you are training or intending to go into the arts industry, you will have 8,000 people say something like, if you can do anything else, do that, because this is hard. And, I, of course, have a lot of thoughts about that, but it is worth being aware that that's what the industry of the arts is like. The arts themselves don't need to be that way. And what I think is most important about this, I really need to be better about like documenting where I see things, because I saw someone put this on Twitter and I would like to credit them. But I don't remember who it was. But the concept of singing or acting or even speaking, these are not things that we as humans do because we are good at them. Good, me, I hate the words good and bad and all kinds of value judgments generally, unless you follow it with the preposition that it needs to be followed with. Good for what? Good under what conditions, right? But this idea of, oh, I'm a good singer or a bad singer, just like I'm good at math, bad at math. I'm a good actor, bad actor, as though what roles I get are based on some global kind of value that I bring to this thing, is really counterproductive. We don't sing. Humans have been singing since we've been human. Like, it's a method of expression and communication. So the fact that these things have been kind of co-opted and turned into a competitive kind of skill-based, we're assessing how good you are or are not thing, drives a lot of people away from something that I guess what I'm trying to say is there's no such thing as artists and not artists, right? We all sing, we all draw, we all create narratives and stories. And I would love for people to be able to engage in those things more and more without the value judgment piece of, am I good at it? Will other people think I'm good or bad at it? Yeah. I don't know if that's at all what you were intending to get into, but
no. I think that point just does need to be brought up in that most people enter into the arts to express themselves in a different way, but then this other sort of layer gets added onto it of, I need to be the best or else I'm nobody, and I fall back into this sort of support role, in which that's not really the point of engaging in this.
Yeah. That's how you have to do it to make money in it. And well, I shouldn't even say that. That's not how you have to, but that's how most of the money that is involved in these are delivered, through those kind of ways of going about it. But it's storytelling. That's what it means, if you ask me, which, we're all listening to me right now, I guess, even though no one asked. That what it means to be human is just making connections, making narratives, connecting things that don't have an intrinsic connection.
And that's what I really think I got out of this conversation today, is that oftentimes when we think about art or therapy, we think about visual arts therapy, right? Going into a studio and sketching, drawing, painting, modeling, whatever. But I feel like what I've heard today is that through acting, through theater, there are ways to safely play out some different scenarios in which you're trying out, as long as we create that safe environment for people to do so.
Yeah. We mentioned Ericksonian hypnosis, right? Which there are things I love about and things I don't necessarily agree with. But humor is an example of Ericksonian style hypnosis, that what I'm doing is drawing your attention to something you would not have otherwise been paying attention to, but in a non-problematic way so that you can play with it. So all of us every day are experimenting. How many times, if you really pay attention to yourself, and a lot of us may not pay attention in this way, but here's an experiment. Pay attention to when you're making a joke, when you're doing something that makes another person laugh, and note how often that thing exists in this kind of nebulous space where it's a joke if they take it as a joke, but it's not if they don't, right? It's a way of kind of testing the waters, not in I hate like defense mechanism, not in that kind of way, but in a safe exploration kind of way. How many times are you going to say like, oh, I'm going to be your stalker, basically. Let's be best friends, right? Which is actually communicating, no, I really do hope we can talk more, but I'm putting it in this over-the-top humorous way so that if you're laughing like, oh, that's ridiculous, I'm like, yeah, that's ridiculous. But if you're like, oh, I love you too, it's like, okay, good, let's actually do something. That's why I love theater in particular, and I know everyone has their own things, but it's the communal aspect. Again, I think that's what makes us human, is to be able to specialize, to know that you, Mike, know things that I don't, and you know that I know things you don't, and so we communicate and share and experiment to find what's useful, instead of walking around saying, no, I'm the best at this, meaning I no longer need to listen to anybody else because I know everything that everybody else knows. Or if they know anything different than me, then the things that they know are not valuable. That's that deficit model. That's why I hate grading, A, B, C, whatever. It's like, it's not, you probably know better than anyone, right? That's not a measure of learning. It's a measure of whatever it's intended to be a measure of. And different educators would say different things. And it's useful, but it's competitive.
Well, and just like that, another hour on Effective Artistry has passed. Thank you for everybody that joined us today. Brandon, it was wonderful having you on here. Special thanks goes out to Annie Calhoun and all her work. Join us next time. Same time, 1 p.m. Central, same streams on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And we'll be back next week with another episode.
Yeah, everybody, go find or create your safe spaces and then play in them. That's what I'm taking away from this, you know? Be safe and then play. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you.